Damien Cross stared at the email notification on his phone, his jaw clenching as he read the engagement announcement. There she was, his ex-girlfriend Victoria, radiant in her designer dress. Clinging to the arm of some hedge fund manager with perfect teeth and inherited wealth, the caption read, "Celebrating our engagement at the Metropolitan Museum Gala. So grateful for this beautiful life." Beautiful life. The words tasted bitter in his mind. 3 years ago, Victoria had walked out of their relationship claiming he was too focused on revenge fantasies and incapable of genuine emotion. She had accused him of being manipulative, of using people as pawns in his endless chess games. Perhaps she had been right, but that didn't make her betrayal any less painful. Damien set down his phone and walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows of his downtown penthouse. The city sprawled below him, thousands of lights twinkling like stars he could never reach. His tech company, Cross-Tech Solutions, made him wealthy beyond his wildest dreams, but success felt hollow when you had no one to share it with. Victoria had been his anchor, his reason to build something meaningful. Without her, the money was just numbers in an account. But now, seeing her happiness plastered across social media, something dark and calculating stirred within him. If Victoria thought he was manipulative, he would show her just how right she had been. He would orchestrate something so elaborate, so publicly humiliating, that she would finally understand the pain she had caused him. The idea came to him during his morning run along the Hudson River. Victoria had always prided herself on her charitable work, constantly posting about her volunteer activities and donations. She loved being seen as generous and compassionate, basking in the admiration of her social circle. What if he could use that against her? A fake charity auction, something that would draw her in with its promise of good deeds and social recognition, only to expose her true nature when the moment was right. He would make her bid on items that didn't exist, for causes that were fabricated. In front of all the people whose opinions she valued most, Damien spent the next 2 weeks researching legitimate charities, studying their marketing materials and fundraising strategies. He needed his deception to be flawless, indistinguishable from the real thing. He registered a shell company called Children's Art Foundation and created a professional website, complete with stock photos of smiling children and inspirational quotes about creativity and hope. The hardest part was assembling his team of accomplices. Damien contacted several theater groups, hiring actors to play the roles of charity organizers and donors. He rented a ballroom at the Riverside Hotel, the same venue where he and Victoria had attended their first formal event together. The symbolism felt perfect. 2 weeks before the auction, Damien sent out elegant invitations to Victoria and her entire social circle. The invitation promised an evening of art, philanthropy, and fine dining, with proceeds going to support underprivileged children's access to art education. He knew Victoria couldn't resist such an opportunity to be seen doing good. On the night of the auction, Damien arrived early to oversee the final preparations. The ballroom looked magnificent, decorated with easels displaying children's artwork that he had actually purchased from local schools. The irony wasn't lost on him in his quest for revenge. He had inadvertently supported the very cause he was pretending to champion. The hired actors were in position, dressed in formal attire and briefed on their roles. Janet, a seasoned theater performer, would serve as the auctioneer. Robert and Michelle would act as enthusiastic bidders, driving up prices to ridiculous levels. Everything was choreographed to create maximum drama and embarrassment. Guests began arriving at 7 o'clock, and Damien felt his heart rate increase as he spotted familiar faces from his past life with Victoria. These were people who had once welcomed him into their circle, who had celebrated his successes and supported his relationship. Now they were unwitting participants in his elaborate scheme. At 7:30, Victoria walked through the doors and Damien's breath caught in his throat. She looked stunning in a midnight blue gown, her blonde hair swept up in an elegant chignon. She was alone. Apparently her fiancé was traveling for business. Perfect Victoria surveyed the room with the practiced eye of someone accustomed to high society events. She examined the displayed artwork, nodding appreciatively at the children's colorful paintings and sculptures. Damien watched from across the room as she spoke with other guests, her laugh ringing out like music he had tried so hard to forget. The auction began at 8 o'clock, with Janet taking the stage to deliver a heartfelt speech about the importance of arts education. The first few items were legitimate pieces Damien had purchased specifically for this event. Small paintings and sculptures that would serve as warm-up acts for the main deception. Victoria bid enthusiastically on a watercolor painting of a sunset, eventually winning it for $1,200. She seemed genuinely pleased with her purchase, and Damien felt a flicker of something that might have been guilt. But he pushed the feeling aside, reminding himself of all the nights he had spent alone after she left, all the dreams they had shared that she had discarded like yesterday's newspaper. As the evening progressed, the auction items became more extravagant and the stories more elaborate. Janet described a sculpture created by a 10-year-old girl who had overcome tremendous hardship to pursue her artistic dreams. The piece didn't exist, but the story was compelling enough to drive the bidding to astronomical heights. Damien watched with grim satisfaction as Victoria got caught up in the excitement, bidding against other guests with increasing fervor. She won a fictional painting for $3,000, then a non-existent sculpture for $5,000. Each successful bid was met with applause and congratulations from the other guests, feeding her need for social approval. But as the evening wore on, Damien began to notice something unexpected. Victoria wasn't just bidding for show. She was genuinely engaged with the stories being told, asking detailed questions about the children and their backgrounds. When she won a piece, she would study the accompanying materials with real interest. Discussing the artistic techniques with other guests, there was something authentic in her responses that Damien hadn't anticipated. This wasn't the shallow, materialistic woman he had convinced himself she was. This was someone who genuinely cared about the cause, who saw beyond the social opportunity to the human stories beneath. The realization should have been satisfying, but instead it left Damien feeling hollow and confused. He had spent months planning this evening, months nurturing his anger and resentment. And now his carefully constructed narrative was crumbling before his eyes as the auction reached its climax. With Victoria having spent nearly $15,000 on non-existent art, Damien found himself questioning everything. What had he become? What kind of person orchestrated such elaborate deceptions? Victoria had accused him of being manipulative, and here he was, proving her right in the most spectacular way possible. The final item of the evening was announced. A collaborative mural supposedly painted by an entire elementary school class. The starting bid was set at $2,000, and Damien watched as Victoria's hand shot up immediately. She was determined to win this piece, to complete her evening of generosity. But as the bidding escalated, Damien noticed something troubling. Victoria was bidding against a woman he didn't recognize, someone who wasn't part of his hired cast. This stranger was bidding with the same passion and determination as Victoria, driving the price higher and higher. The woman was perhaps 30 years old, with auburn hair and intelligent green eyes. She wore a simple black dress that spoke of modest means rather than wealth, yet she continued to bid with unwavering resolve. There was something about her presence that felt different from the other guests, more genuine, more grounded. As the bidding reached $8,000, Damien realized that his carefully orchestrated event was spinning out of control. This unknown woman was disrupting his script, introducing an element of unpredictability that he hadn't accounted for. And somehow, watching her compete with Victoria for a piece of art that didn't exist, he felt the first stirrings of something that might have been shame. The auction was supposed to end with Victoria's humiliation. But instead, it was evolving into something else entirely, something that Damien was no longer sure he understood or controlled. The auburn-haired woman won the final piece for $9,000, her face flushed with triumph and exhaustion. Victoria graciously congratulated her, and Damien watched as the two women shook hands with genuine warmth. The stranger introduced herself as Celeste Morgan, an elementary art teacher from the Bronx who had saved for months to attend this auction. "I've been following the Children's Art Foundation's work for years," Celeste said, her voice carrying a slight tremor of excitement. "The way they transform lives through creativity is exactly what I try to do in my classroom every day." Damien felt his stomach drop. Years of following the Foundation's work, the organization he had created just 3 weeks ago. He watched as Celeste continued talking with Victoria, discussing specific programs and initiatives that existed only in his fabricated website. As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, Damien found himself lingering near the back of the ballroom, observing the cleanup process with growing unease. The actors he had hired were efficiently dismantling the elaborate set, but their casual demeanor seemed at odds with the emotional weight of the evening's supposed cause. Celeste Morgan was still there, carefully examining the children's artwork that had been used as decoration. She took photos of each piece, scribbling notes in a small notebook she carried in her purse. There was something methodical about her approach that made Damien nervous. "Excuse me," Celeste approached Janet, the hired auctioneer, who was packing up her materials. "I was wondering if you could put me in touch with the Foundation's education director. I'd love to volunteer my time, maybe help develop some curriculum." Janet's eyes widened slightly, and she glanced around the room before responding. "Oh, well, I'm just a contractor hired for tonight's event. I don't have direct contact with the Foundation's staff." Celeste frowned. "That's strange. Your speech earlier was so detailed about the programs. Assumed you worked directly with the children." I just memorized the talking points they gave me," Janet stammered. Clearly uncomfortable with the line of questioning, Damien realized he needed to intervene before his entire scheme unraveled. He approached the two women with what he hoped was a casual smile. "I couldn't help but overhear," he said, extending his hand to Celeste. "I'm Damien Cross, one of the event organizers. I'd be happy to connect you with the Foundation's leadership team." Celeste shook his hand, studying his face with those intelligent green eyes. "That would be wonderful. I'm Celeste Morgan. Teach 4th grade at PS 147 in the South Bronx. Tonight has been incredibly inspiring." "I can imagine," Damien replied, feeling the weight of her genuine enthusiasm. "What drew you to the Children's Art Foundation specifically?" "Their approach to trauma-informed art therapy," Celeste said without hesitation. "The way they work with children who have experienced loss or displacement, it's exactly what many of my students need." Damien nodded, having no idea what she was talking about. His fictional website had mentioned trauma therapy in passing, but he hadn't bothered to research the actual methodologies. "Yes, that's one of our core programs. I was particularly moved by the case study of the young girl from Somalia who used collage to process her family's refugee experience," Celeste continued. "The progression of her work over 6 months was remarkable." There was no case study. Damien had lifted that paragraph from another charity's annual report without fully understanding its context. He felt trapped in his own web of lies, each of Celeste's questions revealing another gap in his fabricated foundation. "Perhaps we could continue this conversation over coffee," he suggested, desperate to buy time to figure out how to extract himself from this mess. "I'd love to hear more about your work with students." "I'd like that," Celeste agreed, but her tone had shifted slightly. There was a wariness in her voice that hadn't been there before, though I have to admit, I'm having trouble finding much information about the Foundation online beyond your basic website." Damien's heart rate spiked. "We're a relatively new organization, still building our digital presence." "The domain was registered 3 weeks ago," Celeste said quietly. "I checked." The statement hung in the air between them like a challenge. Damien realized that this unassuming elementary school teacher was far more perceptive than he had given her credit for. She had been investigating his charity from the moment she became suspicious. "I think we need to talk," Celeste said, her voice firm but not accusatory, privately. An hour later, they sat across from each other in a quiet diner near the hotel. Celeste had her notebook open on the table, filled with observations and questions that systematically dismantled every aspect of Damien's elaborate deception. "The artwork displayed tonight was real," she began, "but it wasn't created by children in your programs. I recognized several pieces from the Hamilton Elementary School art show last month. I was a judge." Damien stared at his untouched coffee, unable to meet her eyes. "How long have you known?" "I started getting suspicious when the auctioneer couldn't answer basic questions about art therapy techniques. Then I noticed that several of the bidders seemed to know each other, but not the cause they were supposedly supporting." Celeste leaned forward, But what I don't understand is why someone would go to such elaborate lengths to stage a fake charity auction. The amount of planning and expense required is staggering. It's complicated, Damien said, finally looking up at her. Something in her expression was kind rather than judgmental, which somehow made his shame feel even heavier. I have time, she replied simply. And so Damien found himself telling the story he had never told anyone. He spoke about his relationship with Victoria, about the dreams they had shared, and the devastating way it had ended. He described the loneliness and anger that had consumed him, the way success had felt meaningless without someone to share it with. I wanted to hurt her, he admitted. I wanted her to feel as foolish and exposed as she made me feel. I thought, if I could embarrass her publicly, somehow it would balance the scales. Celeste listened without interrupting, occasionally taking notes in her small notebook. When he finished, she sat quietly for several minutes, processing what she had heard. You know what's interesting? She finally said. Tonight, watching Victoria bid on those pieces, I could see how much she genuinely cared about the cause. Wasn't performing for the crowd. She was emotionally invested in helping children. Damien nodded miserably. I saw it too, what I expected. And now she's going to donate thousands of dollars to a charity that doesn't exist, Celeste continued, along with me and several other people who attended tonight. We're all going to feel betrayed and foolish, but we're also going to be left without a way to channel our desire to help. The full weight of what he had done hit Damien like a physical blow. In his quest for revenge, he had hurt not just Victoria, but dozens of genuinely good people who had come to the auction with open hearts and generous intentions. I have to fix this, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. We have to fix this, Celeste corrected him, because I'm not walking away from this mess, and I'm not letting all that good intention go to waste. She opened her notebook to a fresh page and began writing. Here's what we're going to do. First, you're going to return every penny that was donated tonight. Second, you're going to personally apologize to every person who attended. And third, you're going to help me create a real charity that can actually help the children who need it. Damien stared at her, amazed by her directness and determination. Why would you want to work with me? I'm exactly the kind of manipulative person you should avoid. Because, Celeste said, meeting his eyes directly, I think you're also the kind of person who can recognize when he's made a mistake and wants to make it right. That's rarer than you might think. For the first time in months, Damien felt something other than anger or emptiness. It was a small spark of hope, fragile but real. Besides, Celeste added with a slight smile, you clearly have excellent organizational skills and significant resources. If we can redirect that energy towards something constructive, we might actually be able to make a difference. They spent the next 3 hours in that diner, planning how to unravel Damien's deception while salvaging something positive from the wreckage. Celeste's practical approach to problem solving was unlike anything Damien had experienced. She didn't waste time on judgment or recrimination. She simply focused on solutions. By the time the sun began to rise over the city, they had outlined a plan that was both ambitious and achievable. They would create a legitimate foundation, one that could honor the generous intentions of everyone who had attended the auction. It would be hard work, requiring months of dedication and significant financial investment. But it felt like the right path forward. As they prepared to leave the diner, Celeste turned to him with a serious expression. I need you to understand something. I'm not doing this to save you or to fix you. I'm doing this because those children who need art education deserve better than to be collateral damage in someone else's revenge fantasy. I understand, Damien replied, and he meant it. For the first time since Victoria had left him, he felt accountable to something larger than his own pain. Good, Celeste said, gathering her things. Then let's get to work. 3 months later, Damien stood in a classroom at PS 147, watching as 24 fourth graders worked intently on their self-portraits. The morning light streaming through the windows illuminated their concentrated faces as they mixed colors and experimented with different techniques. Remember, Celeste called out from the front of the room, there's no right or wrong way to show who you are. Your portrait should tell your story. The transformation had been exhausting, but remarkable. True to their plan hatched in that all-night diner session, Damien had spent the weeks following the fake auction personally contacting every attendee, returning their donations and explaining what had happened. The conversations had been some of the most difficult of his life, but they had also been surprisingly healing. Victoria had been the hardest call to make. She had listened to his confession in silence, and when he finished, she had simply said, "I'm not surprised, Damien, but I am disappointed." A disappointment had hurt more than any anger could have. But then Victoria had done something unexpected. She had asked to be involved in creating the real foundation. "If you're serious about making this right," she had said, "then let me help. I still care about the cause, even if I'm furious with you." The Children's Creative Foundation had officially launched 6 weeks ago, with Celeste as executive director and Damien as the founding donor. Victoria served on the board of directors, alongside several other people who had attended the original auction. What had begun as an act of deception had evolved into something genuine and meaningful. Mr. Cross, a small voice interrupted his thoughts. "Can you help me with this?" Each-year-old Miguel held up his portrait, which showed a figure surrounded by musical notes and soccer balls. "Want to add my family, but I don't know how to make them fit." Damien knelt beside Miguel's desk, studying the artwork with the same attention he had once devoted to quarterly earnings reports. Over the past 3 months, he had discovered that working with children required a completely different kind of focus. It was immediate and honest in a way that corporate strategy had never been. "What if your family is part of the music and sports?" Damien suggested. "Maybe they're cheering you on from the stands or singing along with your favorite song." Miguel's face lit up with understanding, and he immediately began sketching figures in the margins of his portrait. Damien moved on to help other students, marveling at how natural this work had become for him. The foundation now operated in 12 schools across 3 boroughs, providing art supplies, teaching support, day and after-school programs. They had hired for full-time art therapists and partnered with local museums to provide field trip opportunities. It was everything Damien's fake charity had pretended to be, and more. "You're getting good at this," Celeste said, peering beside him as he helped a girl named Carmen add details to her family portrait. "Had a good teacher," Damien replied, glancing at her with a smile that had become increasingly common over the past few months. Their working relationship had evolved into something deeper, though neither of them had spoken about it directly. There were moments of connection that felt like more than professional collaboration, shared glances during board meetings, lingering conversations after long days at the foundation office, the comfortable silence they fell into when reviewing grant applications together. "The Martinez Family Portrait Series is ready for the exhibition," Celeste continued, referring to the foundation's first public art show, scheduled for the following week. "The transformation in these kids' work over the past 2 months is incredible." The exhibition would be held at the same hotel where Damien's fake auction had taken place. The symbolism had been Celeste's idea, a way of reclaiming the space and turning it into something positive. Local news stations had expressed interest in covering the event, and several prominent donors had committed to attending. "Are you nervous about seeing everyone again?" Celeste asked, reading his expression. "Terrified," Damien admitted. "But in a good way, I think. For the first time in my life, I'm about to present something that's completely honest." The week of the exhibition passed in a blur of preparation and anticipation. Damien found himself working 18-hour days, not because he had to, but because he genuinely cared about every detail. The children's artwork deserved to be presented beautifully, and he wanted everyone who attended to understand the impact of their support. The night of the exhibition, Damien arrived early to help with final preparations. The ballroom looked completely different from the scene of his deception 3 months earlier. Instead of elaborate decorations and formal staging, the space was filled with colorful displays of children's artwork. Hand-painted banners hung from the ceiling, and each piece was accompanied by a short story written by the young artist. Guests began arriving at 7 o'clock, and Damien felt his heart rate increase as he recognized familiar faces. These were many of the same people who had attended his fake auction, but now they were here for a completely different reason. They came not because they had been manipulated, but because they had chosen to support something real and meaningful. Victoria arrived with her fiancés, looking elegant in a simple green dress. She approached Damien with a tentative smile, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. "The exhibition is beautiful," she said finally. "The children's work is extraordinary." "Thank you," Damien replied. "And thank you for being here. I know it can't be easy." "Actually, it is easy," Victoria said, surprising him, "because this is who I always hoped you could be. Not the angry, manipulative person you became after we broke up, but the passionate, dedicated person I fell in love with. You just needed to find the right outlet for that energy." Her words carried no romantic undertone, just genuine appreciation for his transformation. It was a kind of closure Damien hadn't expected, and it felt like a gift. "I'm proud of you," Victoria added, squeezing his arm gently before moving on to examine the artwork with her fiancé. The evening proceeded with a warmth and authenticity that Damien had never experienced at formal events. Children who had participated in the Foundation's programs served as guides, explaining their artwork to guests with the confidence and pride that came from being truly heard and valued. Celeste gave a brief speech about the Foundation's mission and impact, but the real presentation came from the young artists themselves. Miguel performed a song he had written about his neighborhood, while Carmen read a poem inspired by her self-portrait. Other children demonstrated art techniques they had learned, turning the exhibition into an interactive celebration of creativity. As the evening reached its climax, Damien found himself standing beside Celeste, watching as guests wrote checks and made commitments to support the Foundation's expansion. The generosity was overwhelming, but it felt completely different from the manipulated donations of his fake auction. This was money given freely with full understanding of how it would be used. "We did it," Celeste said quietly, her voice filled with amazement. "We actually did it." "You did it," Damien corrected. "I just provided the funding and tried not to mess things up too badly." Celeste turned to face him fully, her green eyes serious and bright. "That's not true, and you know it. This foundation exists because you were willing to admit you were wrong and work to make it right. That takes courage." They stood close together in the bustling ballroom, surrounded by art and laughter and the sound of children sharing their stories. The moment felt suspended in time, full of possibility and hope. "Celeste," Damien began, his voice uncertain. "I need to tell you something." "I know," she said softly. "Me too. These past 3 months, working with you, seeing how you care about the children and fight for what's right, it's changed me in ways I didn't think were possible. I'm not the same person who planned that fake auction." "I can see that," Celeste replied. "And I need you to know that what I feel for you has nothing to do with trying to save you or fix you. You've done that work yourself. What I feel is admiration for who you've become and excitement about who you're still becoming." Damien reached for her hand, his heart racing with a different kind of nervousness than he had felt during his revenge plotting. This was the vulnerability of hope rather than the calculation of anger. "I love you," he said simply. "Not because you helped me find redemption, but because you're brilliant and passionate, and you see possibilities where other people see problems. You make me want to be better, not out of guilt, but out of joy." "I love you too," Celeste replied, her smile radiant. "I love the work we're building together. It's not just the foundation, but this life we're creating." Their kiss was interrupted by the sound of applause from across the room where Miguel was finishing his musical performance. They broke apart, laughing, and joined the crowd in celebrating the young artist's accomplishment. Later that evening, after the last guest had departed and the artwork had been carefully packed away, Damien and Celeste stood alone in the empty ballroom. The space that had once housed his most shameful moment now held the memory of his greatest triumph. "What happens now?" Damien asked, taking her hand again. "Now we go back to work," Celeste said practically. "We have 12 more schools that want to partner with us, and the city council is interested in providing additional funding." "There's so much to do," meant with us, Damien clarified, smiling at her characteristic focus on the work. "Oh," Celeste said, blushing slightly. "I suppose we figure that out as we go. Build something real and honest, one day at a time." As they walked out of the hotel together, Damien reflected on the strange journey that had brought them to this moment. His quest for revenge had led him to love, his desire to cause pain had resulted in healing, and his most manipulative act had taught him the value of authentic connection. 6 months later, the Children's Creative Foundation had expanded to serve 42 schools across the city. Damien had sold his tech company to focus full-time on the foundation's work, discovering that his business skills translated beautifully to nonprofit management. He and Celeste had moved in together, their shared apartment filled with children's artwork and grant applications, and the comfortable chaos of two people building something meaningful together. On a warm spring evening, as they prepared for the foundation's first annual gala, Damien paused to watch Celeste review the guest list. She sat cross-legged on their couch, surrounded by papers and coffee cups, completely absorbed in her work. Her auburn hair caught the lamplight, and her green eyes sparkled with the intensity that had first drawn his attention. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, looking up to find him staring. "Just how grateful I am," Damien replied honestly. "For this work, for the children we serve, for you. For the chance to become someone worthy of all of it." Celeste set aside her papers and reached for his hand. "You know what I realized the other day? If you hadn't staged that fake auction, we never would have met. Your worst moment led to our best beginning." "Are you saying I should be proud of my revenge plot?" Damien asked, laughing. "I'm saying that sometimes the most broken parts of ourselves can become the foundation for something beautiful, if we're brave enough to rebuild." That night, as they fell asleep in each other's arms, Damien thought about the children whose lives had been touched by their work, about the genuine connections that had grown from his web of deceptions, about the love that had emerged from his darkest intentions. He had set out to orchestrate someone else's humiliation, and had instead discovered his own capacity for joy. The auction of hearts, it turned out, had been won by everyone involved.